Hello and welcome to the Center for Military Modernization, Warrior Maven. I'm Kris Osborn. Very significant opportunity today to talk to a leader and a combat veteran. We are joined by Mr. Mike Mears. He is the former director of HR for the CIA, very senior member of the intelligence community, as well as a combat veteran. He served in Vietnam and is very familiar with Army and combat tactics as well.
Thank you, Kris. It's an absolute delight to be here. And I'm a former CIA chief and retired about 15 years ago, and now I've been off on leadership trail, trying to figure out what makes people tick and how do we get the best out of them as a result of that.
Well, and about that, sir, your insight has been extraordinary talking about some of these things. Zelensky and the Ukrainian force has truly captured the world imagination. When you think of 50 countries supporting the U.S. and Secretary Austin and the defense group to establish a long-term plan to help support the Ukrainian effort, emotionally, psychologically, drawing from your expertise, what is making Ukraine have so much guts?
I think, obviously an existential threat helped sharpen minds and hearts, as we recall from 9/11, and is certainly a unifying force. I was talking to a Ukrainian the other day, and I asked him, I said, "Did you vote for Zelensky?" And he said, "Oh, no, I thought the guy was a comedian. I didn't vote for him." And then he paused and he said, "And today I'll die for him." And what's interesting, I look back and Zelensky had about a 26% approval rating on February 23rd or shortly before the invasion. And I think there was a recent survey shows him with 91% approval rating. That's unimaginable. So yeah, absolutely. He has absolutely captured the hearts and minds of people. And starting off with that well-publicized act of courage of, I don't need a lift, I need ammo. I'm staying here. He voted, great leaders vote with their feet and with their calendars. And that's what he did.
Well, I have to ask you about Zelensky and the psychology of that. I mean, certainly Ukraine and the fervor, the will. In fact, I recall the former deputy of the CIA, John McLaughlin, on network television saying it's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog. And that seemed to make so much sense. What inspires a leader to be willing to stand there in the middle of Kiev and just defy a massively larger force? That kind of inspirational willingness to take a risk. And that seems to be throughout Ukrainian military, with all these civilians just picking up rifles and fighting.
Well, first off, let me just give a tip of the hat to John McLaughlin. That guy was one of the greatest leaders I've seen. He was a gracious human being, who highly competent, knew his stuff, willing to learn, deeply loved by the employees. When he retired, they got a little book for people to fill out with comments about him. Quickly, the book filled up, so they had to get another and another and another. There were so many comments. But back to Zelensky, this, in a way, this goes to our leaders born or made, and I believe the answer is both. Assessment companies, which actually key off of work done in the OSS in World War II, but assessment companies that assess for leadership attributes. It's not perfect, but they with some precision, they can filter out, does the person have drive? Is that balanced by empathy? Are they optimists? Are they learners? So there is a cluster of measurable traits or near traits that you can measure and predict future behavior. That was a great discovery actually in the OSS in 1943. So if you did that, if you gave those assessments to Zelensky, I'm absolutely convinced he wouldn't come out in the top 8%, which are people with super strong leadership attributes. He'd come out in the top 1%.
Yeah.
Talking about the man for the times.
Yeah.
Get on YouTube and look at any of his videos every night speaking to the people. He's not just going after that logical brain, he's going after that automatic brain, which is full of instincts and emotions and fears and all that. He covers it all in his talks. It's the most inspirational messages I've ever seen. So I just think it's like this is a miracle that it all came together and the right guy was in the right place at the right time.
It's pretty amazing when you just think about it as pure guts and a willingness to capture the global imagination. That's one reason, perhaps, why 50 countries are now in the Ukraine group talking to Secretary Austin about a long-term plan to support Ukraine. There's almost an emotional component to all of this that has a tactical and strategic implication.
I love it that you say that. It is, a lot of the stuff I've done is I started with where Daniel Kahneman worked. He was the guy that wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. And he talked about the logical brain, very simple model, logical brain. And then there's what I call the automatic brain, which is basically everything else, our dreams, hopes, habits, and so forth. So he was taking that approch, and I think it's a good one to use in leadership, where you've got to engage the automatic brain, but you also have to engage that logical brain. We forget that quite often, where we'll give the logic for the reason for a change, and then the change falls flat and we don't understand why. But we're basically, we are emotional and instinctual animals, and as one neuroscience told me, we operate in that mode, the habitual mode and so forth, 80% of the day, 85% of the day. So we should take that into account. And I think that's why Zelensky's has been so effective. Is one, he goes after the head, he goes after the heart, and he goes after the gut, right?
Wow, truly amazing. I remember that quote. What makes, with your insight, what makes someone like a leader like Zelensky, or even your everyman non-combatant, willing to pick up a rifle and fight? How do they cross that threshold and become willing to truly risk all? Because a lot of people just might want to take off or just not want to do that. Yet collectively, the Ukrainians are doing that almost as a country.
I'm just totally energized by following the whole war because of that. It's so remarkable to see, and then you see the memes that spin off on the internet with the tractors pulling Ukrainian farmers pulling tractors, taking tractors, pulling tanks, and so forth, and the ceremonies that they had on their Independence Day with a little flag with everybody's name who had died so far, the civilians in this thing. And then one of my favorite was the tank parade in the middle of Kiev a little while back, with where they brought the giant cranes in and put these tank bodies. So the Russians got their great parade through Kiev, but it was after the fact, and it was just stationary burned out tanks that were doing it. But all those things are interesting symbolic actions, which has a big effect on us, on people. And just to go into an off thing for a little bit, the reason for that is, again, my idea of what makes people tick. If you understand human nature, you can see why certain things happen. Well, the reason those symbolic actions are so effective, and Zelensky's personal appeals every night are so effective, is the optical portion of the brain, the brain that's given up to vision and visioning, I might add, not just seeing, but also visioning stories, is about the size territorially as Asia on the world map. That's how big that vision and visioning center is. So a study just last month in psychology stated that if all your senses say one thing, but your eyes tell you the other, you'll believe the eyes. So seeing is believing, basically. All these old sayings come true. So that's what ties all that together, that the Ukrainians have been able to use this power of storytelling and vision and visioning. And on the Russian side, of course, they are too. If you watch Russian news, I try to check in every other night until I get so disgusted I've got to turn it off.
Right.
But they're using some of those techniques with a very isolated singular message, striking fear into the native Russians that Ukraine is coming. I mean, that the NATO is going to come after you, or some other crazy story for the night. And they, by precluding all other information and watching this on television, that's sort of the message that takes over, that only Putin can protect you. There's things to be worried about and fearful of, but only Putin can protect you. So each side uses a different method, and one of them is simply taking the truth and blowing it out in story format and visually and so on. And then the other side obviously is using the worst of propaganda techniques.
That's amazing. It would be fascinating, and I would think quite relevant to take a look at that Russian disinformation, kind of analyze the Russian news and expose just how at odds it is with kind of reality to a certain extent. Seems pretty crazy.
Some people,
go ahead, sir.
Here and there are mocking it, and they put out things, but some of the classic things I hope somebody would put together in a documentary are things where the Russians have gone out again with video or a visual and said such and such, and then some wonk on the internet gets the GPS coordinates to show it was totally false, or they can show the bullets came from this side, not that side, so the story's totally false. And so you're getting these little ad hoc pockets of people completely disapproving proving this to be false, these basic some of these basic Russian stories. So I'd love for somebody to put it all together, because it'd be a powerful message. But what it does do, it just shows you how powerful disinformation can be. And in the new age we're sitting in, we've got to be careful of that as a nation, and the whole world does, obviously. The interesting thing is, I think I did one of my newsletters. I wrote about Putin versus Zelensky, and I had this was a great opportunity for me in May. I slipped in, got permission to slip in on a Zoom call with Zelensky, and I mean to tell you, the guy is a 1%er when it comes to leadership, and of course Putin is on the extreme autocratic end of the spectrum there. But what the Ukrainians have done is, in part listening to us since 2014, I suppose, on the importance of decentralizing so that you do get that agility and so forth. And that's the only way you can do it. As the Russian playbook is 32 up left, off left tackle, and let's play it over and over and over again, because that's in the book. And the Ukrainians are just showing incredible adaptability. I know I heard of one guy who was, back in the day, after World War II, the Russians invented a hand grenade that it was a shaped hand grenade that you could throw at a tank, and if you hit it, you could knock a tank out. And that was a result of them not being able to knock out German tanks with the stuff they had. Well, the little problem with that is you got to be 10 feet away from a tank, and I don't want to do that, and you don't want to do that to throw it. So quickly thereafter, they came up with the RPG, the rocket propelled grenade, which gave you greater distance. Well, the problem is now they had millions of these little 30 and 40 millimeter hand-thrown grenades in the warehouses. So what do they do with them? Well, they get them out to the satellites. So they shipped massive amounts, for example, to the Ukraine, and they just sat in warehouses for years and years. So some enterprising Ukrainian thought, geez, if I took these things and I got a 3D printer and put little fins on them, and then I could take them up in a drone and drop them, what havoc I could raise in trenches and so forth. And so think of that innovation to do that on that side. And nothing like that has occurred on the Russian side. Absolutely nothing.
That's amazing. I can't help but think of the tactical implications. And with your combat background, I'd love your thoughts on this. Interestingly, I'm not over there, but just looking at the weapons being used and how they might be applied, certainly you have something like their radio frequency. There hasn't been a lot of EW, and Russia was, of course, quite known for that earlier in 2014. And one of the things that senior leaders have said that it's likely that there is, as you point out, a decentralization. If you have multiple nodes, there's no central hub that both emits a signal that could be targeted or also that could cripple the entire communications network if it were hit. Same thing with the ambushes, certainly with the anti-tank weapons. There clearly appears to be this dismounted, dispersed opportunity to do these hit and run attacks, perhaps attack from obscure positions behind a rock, up in a building where you can't be detected by counter sensors per se. So there are all these really fascinating ways that tactically some of these concepts have been applied. What is your thought about some of that?
Oh, I marvel too. When this thing started, Kris, I remember on about day 3 of the invasion, but right at the end of February, I made a list of things that I thought the Russians had messed up, and I had a list of 29 things, which is it's hard to believe that you could have a group misfire on in so many ways, whether it was logistics, the plan of attack, or attacking on too many fronts. And I mean, that was a colossal list. And it's funny to me. I think that what happened, my belief is because Putin immediately lashed out at a group 5 within the FSB, and supposedly arrested the fellow who was the chief there. My theory was that the FSB, old KGB, was reporting good news reporting what the leader wanted to hear. And by the way, they've always done that since 1950s in embassies abroad. They always give the leader what they want to hear. Well, as a result, it would, if you had that information, it'd be logical to assume the government would collapse Ukrainian government would collapse in 2 days. And that's why I'm thinking that's why they had so many of the folks from the Guard in this initial force. Some of them even had were carrying implements and so forth for crowd control. That they thought they would be more of an MP role than they were in a combat role. But again, that's a great. This is a great lesson for all of us of information not flowing up again because of fear, but it's that the need to get feedback up, like we talked about earlier with the call center at Fort Leavenworth. The need to get that feedback up is absolutely crucial. So you could think about every soldier is a sensor, an activator. So how do you capture that? I'm happy to say and proud to say I think we're headed in that direction on our side, and luckily the Russians aren't. But that the idea of decentralizing and letting people use their own heads, at the same time doing it in a controlled and having some kind of framework around it, I think it's a winning solution going forward.
Interesting. It calls to mind a recent conversation we had with the former Gulf War Commander Task Force, who basically helped the Third ID surge across the desert and fought some of those famous battles at the Baghdad airport against the Republican Guard. And one of the things he said was that they used intersections, crossroads, those narrow points of entry where armored vehicles might be more vulnerable, and that they had some limited success with that. Clearly, Ukraine, as he observed, seems to be looking at, if you look at all the burnt out vehicles on bridges, they seem to be looking at where are those points of vulnerability and how can we disperse, decentralize, as you say, and take out that advancing armor column. And the success has been so significant that the Marine Corps Force design for 2030 was specifically mentions Ukraine as one of the reasons why they're slightly scaling back heavy armor for the Marine Corps, of course not the Army, to think in a more expeditionary way, in part because of the precedent being set in Ukraine. Anti-armor weapons can be extremely effective if tactically employed the right way, precisely in that way. So I know that was a couple of different thoughts at once, sir, but I can't help but think about what you would think of those.
Well, I agree completely, Kris. And the other thing is, the human factor again. Let's go back to that, which is the fear factor of being on the Russian side and seeing this come at you. After Gulf War One, I had lunch with General Schwarzkopf. He had been an old professor of mine at West Point, believe it or not, and course called Mechanics of Solids. But we went out, and I had to ask the question of, sometimes, General, during war, there's a pivotal moment in which the battle is won. And I said, did you see that in that Gulf War? And he talked about, he said, yes, absolutely. But this was his answer. I was expecting some pivotal point tactically, but he took it from a psychological question, a point of view. So he said, yes, it was when we were doing the kind of the left hook coming straight in toward the Republican Guard armor units that there was an Iraqi lieutenant standing on the back of a tank on the grill, looking through his binoculars. He didn't see anything. Suddenly, the tank on his right blows up, and the Iraqi looked again on the horizon. There's nothing there because, of course, we're firing out of range, eyesight range. And then he looks up, and there are no airplanes. And Schwarzkopf said, and then the tank to his left blew up. And he said, that's the moment we won the war. So isn't that interesting that the human factor, that fear factor of not understanding what's coming at you, whether it's this silly little modified quadricopter drone, or whether it's a Javelin or HIMARS or whatever, is a central component of war. And I think that's what's going on in grinding the Russians down in terms of the question you just asked.
I love what your psychology expertise is truly amazing, and it can't help but remind me of another liberal arts parallel. I was writing about the Russian morale problem and all these anecdotal stories about how they take off or don't necessarily want to fight. And I thought about Rousseau's description of the noble savage and this idea of natural pity, that if an animal sees another animal of its own kind, there is kind of a compassion, that there's almost a biological mechanism. Perhaps Russians just, especially without a real raison d'etre or kind of a motivating reason, they don't want to kill Ukrainians.
We certainly see that on some, and of course, the intercepted phone calls that I can see are those provided by the Ukrainian side. So they obviously let the juiciest and best ones out. But that's what you see pick up, Kris, in those intercepts on the calls home, is exactly that. I thought I was coming here and to help these people, at least in the early stages, and I find that they don't want help. They don't want to be taken over. And then today, the same thing. The calls going back. I haven't seen any Nazis here. I really don't know why we're risking our lives, and I'm losing friends. So I think you're right.
It's truly amazing. I want to ask you about success stories, and I can't help but think, given your expertise in leaders and developing leaders, are there lessons that Zelensky can teach the West or teach the U.S. about being a leader and leadership? And then along those lines, are there discussable successes within the intelligence community where you applied some of these innovations and you saw massive success or you saw a real impact?
Well, I'd love to teach a course on lessons learned from Zelensky's leadership. He's done it from A to Z. And what's interesting in terms of leadership, what we're looking for is somebody who believes in their vision, their mission. They're bought into that. However, they have to take our needs into account, or at least signal that they are thinking about us. It's not just driving at a in one unilateral direction, but thinking about the people who are affected. He does that every night on his broadcast, talking about the Ukrainian people. And so the one missing link, though, is I think that much of great leadership is a universal in terms of both attributes and the actual behaviors of the leader. It's got to be tweaked culturally for different countries. But it was an interesting study at West Point some time ago that said when you're in combat, all of those attributes or needs, leadership strengths drop. And suddenly another one that's way down below comes up to be number one, and that is competence. And the reason is, if you're caught in a firefight, what you hope more than anything is your sergeant knows what to do, how to do it. He fully and you don't care so much about all this other stuff. And that's the only exception in leadership, I think, in which you get this during life-threatening situations, you get this little reversal. So, but this is where, back to Zelensky, this is where it comes in, is I think that he has shown himself that he's not a comedian. This guy is a highly competent manager, administrator, and leader. I mean, everything we've seen, he just seems to do almost everything perfectly. And so that competence that he's showing is extraordinarily reassuring to the Ukrainian people.
Mr. Mike Mears, former director of CIA for HR and former combat veteran from Vietnam, an amazing American. Truly an honor, sir, to have you and your perspective on today in these critical times for the world. Thank you again. We couldn't be more grateful you joined us.
Kris, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Look forward to talking to you again, sir. Thank you.
Absolutely.